I saw the silhouette of a man standing in my backyard by our fence every single night. What's the creepiest or most paranormal experience that has happened to you? Night shift in a hospital. Went to the toilet, both cubicles empty, sat down to do the business and someone started crying in the next cubicle, bolted out of there, the other toilet was empty. Different night, soon after I started working on this particular ward. Sat at the bottom of the ward, so me and another nurse could get a good view of everyone. Without looking up from her notes she said, "Footsteps are back again." I said, "What footsteps?" She just said to listen. Heard footsteps come from the top of the ward to where we were, then go back to the top end. She didn't even flinch, just said you get used to it. There were some other issues with that particular unit. Eventually a priest came to bless it, and crashed his car on the way home. It has been decommissioned now. So anyone who rides horses regularly will knows, being the last one at the barn sucks. So I was the last person, so I had to shut off the lights. I had to take my horse back to the barn, but where he was kept was not in the main barn. So I shut off the lights and started walking down the path to the other barn. I didn't have my phone on me, so I just used the moonlight. Mind you, this horse is bomb-proof, he never spooks. I'm walking down a path when he suddenly stops and throws his head back and rears. He has whites in his eyes. I look at what he could possibly be spooking at. I assumed it was an oddly placed shadow, but I couldn't see much. Except eyes. I saw human eyes in the shadows. I'm about to scream when my vision goes blank for a second and I come to. I'm still standing and my horse has calmed down. I shake it off and continue to the barn and put him away with no problem. A lot of things. The most amazing was a full body, clear as day apparition of a little girl walking into my parents' room through the closed door. The thing that creeps me out is the fact that it didn't. My family has experienced a little girl spirit in this house since before I was born. It had been quite a few years since anyone experienced her, usually disembodied voice as well as pulling sheets or clothes, and when I saw her, it was just oh, there she is. That's nice. My house growing up was a two-family with a pretty big basement. We lived on the top floor, and the basement was used as storage and as a laundry room. The basement was pretty terrifying. It was super dark, all the lights were in the center of the room, so you had to go into a completely pitch black room, reach your hand up and pull on a string to turn the light on. I don't think I ever went into the basement without a weapon of some sort. When I was 10, my mom left me a note to move the clothes in the wash to the dryer. So I went to the basement, picked up a wiffle ball bat and proceeded into total darkness. I've literally been preparing to turn that light on and see some kind of monster for years. I pull the string, take a step and look up to see a man. He was breathing heavily and looked disheveled. I completely froze. I'm literally shaking to a point that the wiffle bat is sliding out of my hand. Before I can do or say anything, I hear a gun being cocked and my father from behind me say, "If you take one step toward my son, I will blow your head off." The man standing before me takes a few steps back, turns and runs out of the door that leads to the backyard. Long story short, I went downstairs. At the exact same time, my dad watched from the kitchen window as two guys were being chased by the police through the backyards on my street. He saw one of the men hop the fence into my backyard and check the door to the basement. He realized after a few seconds that I was in the basement. I still struggle to go into the basement. When I was about 13, I slept over at my friend's house. I slept on the floor facing the doorway, which was left open. At around 3 a.m., I woke up and swear I saw a ghastly apparition of a sobbing woman in a wedding dress floating down the hallway towards me, disappearing just before she reached the doorway. I eventually got back to sleep and chalked it up to a weird dream. A few days later, this same friend casually mentioned seeing the same ghost or spirit or whatever. I had never told him about my experience. I slept at his house innumerable times over the next few years, but never in that same room, and I never saw her again. Several years ago I was staying at my uncle's house in a room next to their garage. My uncle and I were supposed to go fishing early the next morning. I woke up and it was pretty dark out, but I saw the silhouette of a guy leaning on the wall looking at me. I assumed it was my uncle and started talking to him. "Yeah, I'm getting up, let's go," I said. I walked right past him to turn the lights on. Turned around and there was no one there. What the hell? I might be dreaming, I thought. Turned the lights back off and went back to sleep. I didn't think about this again for a couple months. I was over at my uncle's house again for dinner when his wife says, "I gotta take Uncle Benny's ashes to the mountain and spread them. He's been here for a while." I was like, who's Uncle Benny and what are you talking about? Apparently Uncle Benny is my aunt's uncle who had died several months before I went to my uncle's house. His ashes were in the garage next to where I was sleeping. I wonder if he was looking at me thinking, who the hell is this guy? I don't remember this happening, but my mom told me when I was small I used to talk to an imaginary friend in the corner of the bathroom. I apparently also gave them a name. Sure, imaginary friends are creepy, but most children have them. What's creepy though, is a few years later when my younger brother was able to talk, he stood in that exact corner. He had a conversation with an imaginary friend he called Butterfly Boy. It might be a coincidence, not sure. I'm happy I have no recollection of this. I'm a firm believer in bad energy because of the summer I spent at my grandma's house. My brother and I loved our grandparents and had no notion that there was anything wrong with them. We thought they loved us even more than our own parents. However, I could never shake the uneasy feeling I always had in that house. I just chalked it up to being away from home and in a new place. One summer, the feeling of dread became more intense. The best way I could describe it was that the house was somehow placed in a surreal nightmare. It didn't feel real and I could swear there was this heavy sort of darkness looming over us at all times. I'd constantly look behind me because I was certain someone was there. I couldn't take showers and lost sleep that whole time. And somehow my grandparents didn't seem normal to me anymore. They were the sweetest and still very loving, but in the weirdest way seemed so sinister. I later found out that my grandmother practiced Santeria, used a Ouija board to call upon the dead and would routinely curse people she didn't like. More than that, my mom finally told me that her parents abused her whole life and that Grandpa was a horrible drunk. I used to work for a cleaning company and one of the places they had me go to was a restaurant and church. It was surrounded by a graveyard. Though to be fair, I live 5 minutes away from that graveyard walking. Most of the time I'm cleaning in the very early morning, we're talking around 4 a.m. to 7 a.m., I'm cleaning all by myself and no one who works there comes in until 9 a.m. For the first 3 months it was fine and I wasn't feeling spooked or anything though. One day in early August I'm just going downstairs to put some supplies away when I'm hit with this sudden and intense feeling of danger, as if something was telling me I wasn't welcomed there. It took every fiber of my being to not abandon my supplies and get the hell out of there. I completed my work, but I was very close to tears the whole time since the unexplained fear just wouldn't leave until I was out of that building. From that point on I would get random attacks of fear and eventually I started seeing a shadowy figure that would cause the motion detecting doors to open and close randomly and turn on the stereo in the kitchen at random hours for random intervals. I was able to find a better job and peace out as quick as I could, only training my replacement for one day, and refused to step foot in that place again. Though it wasn't actually paranormal, it still scared the hell out of me. It was about 3 in the morning and I had just gotten off YouTube where I was watching a bunch of videos about the Mothman, who apparently has 2 massive eyes, important later. I then went to the toilet. I live in a small flat so the toilet is just down the hallway for me. As my mother was sleeping in the room next to me and I didn't want to wake her up, I didn't turn any lights on, which is normal for me. When I finished and left the bathroom and decided I was a bit hungry and went to get a snack, also not unusual for me. The kitchen is literally 5 or 6 steps to the left of the bathroom. As I was slowly walking I thought to myself, imagine if there were 2 big red dots in the window, that would be funny. Then when I stepped into the kitchen and looked at the window, there were 2 big red dots in the window. I jumped back and gasped rather loudly and tripped on the back of the kitchen door, and then fell with a loud bang. I got up immediately and the dots were still there. I quickly noticed that the dots were just a reflection and I felt quite stupid. I looked around for what was causing it and it was just the plugs for my fridge and boiler. Since they are both quite important, they have special switches with exposed fuses with light up so you can see it. They're working properly and they were red as the safety glass on them was colored red. I got my food then went to bed with a rather large bump on my head. When I was little, maybe 9, me and my sister loved to go to the thrift store and get stuffed animals with our weekly $5. My sister was probably around 7. This was around 7 years ago, so it's all hazy, but I remember one day we went in and my sister saw this life-size baby giraffe plush. It was about 4 feet 0 inches and she loved it, even though it had almost human eyes. She brought it home after begging my mom for the extra $5 she needed for it, and over time, her collection of these plushies grew. The other 3 she had were a black lab, a lion, and a dolphin. All except the lion started to do strange things if anyone besides my sister was alone with them. My mom recalls many occasions where she'd be cleaning while me and my sister were at school and Dad was at work when she'd find the dog standing in the hall. All the stuffies were in my sister's closet, so this was odd. She'd always move it back and like a month later the same thing would happen. The lion never did anything if I recall, but the dolphin would move to face you if you were in the closet. It was a huge walk-in. It never left the room though. My story happened a long time ago. 3 to 4 years ago. I came home from school early as I felt super sick. It was flu season and I would later find out that you tend to get the flu if you don't get your flu vaccine. My sister wouldn't be here for around 3 more hours, and my mom was getting groceries. Dad was at work. I cuddled up in a blanket and started to watch TV. I remember a storm started to break out. No biggie, as usually in October to November the storms in some parts of Virginia, where I lived at the time, would get nasty. I was hearing thumping upstairs on and off but assumed it was the rain, until something happened directly after the thunder hit. I heard a plate crash. My mom has this really old china set, it's super expensive and it's been in our family forever. Our house shakes during these storms, and I figured a plate must have fell out of the rack. I went to go check to find my 2 cats waiting at the door, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. I opened the door and found the giraffe right at the door. We had moved them into my mom's closet when we moved, so this is where they were. I pushed the giraffe out of the way, and checked on the plates. They were fine. I figured I must have simply imagined the sound. As I was going downstairs, the door from the closet swung open so violently it left a mark on the wall from where the knob hit it. I remember tripping down the last few stairs, hiding under a blanket, and calling my mom. She was on her way home. The 20 minutes before she came home were filled with more pounding sounds, and I even heard groaning. We sold the dolls later. So back in the early 2010s I lived in a house with a creepy basement. It had a minibar, a 2-room bedroom down a small hall next to the laundry room and I had a giant TV to play video games on. Now I had never been scared of basements. Yet something always felt off about the hallway. I just felt unwelcome in that area. My parents commented years later it looked kinda like the room you would put a grandparent in. So, I've never been in a house with major paranormal experience before, and none with malicious paranormal entities. However, I had plenty of stories from my parents of odd nighttime activities I don't remember. Things like standing seemingly fully awake at the door of their bedroom saying nothing then going back to bed or bolting up in my sleep and one time saying, "I don't want to be sick like this anymore," when I had slept soundly through the whole night according to me. The kicker was when I was in that basement and for some reason unknown to me I looked back from my chair towards the main room area. From the deck door I saw a weird shadow about human-sized and vaguely human-shaped gliding across the floor toward the end of the bedroom where the hallway was. It looked 2D, but almost truly 2D, unlike what you might see on a screen. It glided towards the wall, but right for where the bedroom might be on the other side. I had a good spook. I wide-eyed turned back to the TV to process, then looked back and it was gone. I bolted up the stairs then. Despite this, I didn't feel threatened. I just felt like I was unwelcome in that hallway area. Eventually I ended up sleeping in that room as my bedroom. I grew acclimated to the presence over time, but it never did anything bad to me. It just kind of existed, perhaps just wanting to be alone, but not rude or intrusive. I used to hear a woman calling my name in my bedroom when I was a child. The house was extremely old, and could have possibly had previous deceased owners, but I never looked into it. Anyway, I could hear her voice coming from the same exact corner of the bedroom every time, and it was the corner my bed would sit in. I would also see the silhouette of a man standing in my backyard by our fence every single night. I never told anyone because the one single time I tried to tell my dad he genuinely thought something was mentally wrong with me and almost threw me in an institution. I'm pretty sure I picked up a demon on my honeymoon, and my, now ex, felt the same. We went to the coast for a night and had a great time but stayed in a cheap, run-down motel. Decided last minute to stay a second night, but at a nice hotel that I used to go to with my mother all the time. We head over, rent a room, all is normal. Except, as soon as I open the door to that room, this feeling of dread and wrongness settles on me. There's no apparent cause so I try to shake it off and continue on with our day. That night, I have horrible nightmares about sexual assault, which is particularly upsetting because I had not yet begun to deal with my own. Then I wake up in the middle of the night feeling watched and also really needing to pee. I just know, though, that I absolutely should not close myself in the bathroom or lock the door. I turn on the bathroom light and it flickers the entire time I'm peeing and holding the door ajar. I finish up and wash my hands while being very, very sure not to look up in the mirror. Go back to bed and try to sleep, eventually do, but it wasn't restful. The next morning I tell my partner, who also had nightmares about the same thing and woke up in the middle of the night feeling watched. It's spooky, but we don't think about it too much and go home. That night, I went to the bar with my best friend. Looked across the room and saw my rapist standing there, smiling at me. Double take and he was gone. He lives a few hours away, so I wasn't sure why he'd be here. I went home shortly after. For the next week, I couldn't sleep very well. I sat on the edge of the bed that's tucked into the corner of the room, knees to my chest, anxious. I couldn't leave the house. I felt watched and unsafe. My partner is, kinda, Catholic, so gave me holy water and instructed me on a prayer for the Archangel Michael. Then left for a conference across the country. I put that holy water on the windowsills and doors and prayed over everyone, every night. It took some time, but eventually the feeling faded and I felt safe again. Never been back to that hotel though. Also got divorced because I don't think cheating is cool. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button for more videos about scary paranormal things. Share your own experiences in the comments below, and remember to check underneath your bed, just to make sure there is no one or nothing waiting for you.